The end is almost near for the college football regular season. We have so far seen the first couple rankings come out, and yes, it may have some drama in it, and it may also set precedent of what's to come. But don't be fooled. These last weeks mean a lot. They mean a lot to several teams that are right on the brink of elimination. And we're going to talk just about that. And we're going to take a dive into some deep college football drama. I'm your host, Matthew Reardon, and this is Total Sports Talk Beyond the Lights. Whether you grew up in California, Texas, Florida, one thing that has always stood out with high school football is the recruiting process to then be in college football. Those three states is where high school football is the most popular: California, Texas, and Florida. When you are being recruited by some of the top Division I football programs in the country, one of the first things that come to mind is, where am I going to be able to win a championship? Which team do I see that is close to winning that championship by the time I go there? We have seen the utter dominance that Alabama has reigned for so long, and they've also led the top of the recruiting trail. And then we saw Georgia take over that. Ohio State's there as well. But what do those three teams have in common is they're always heavy favorites to win a national championship because of the program they have built. Well, now that NIL has come into fruition, we have seen a lot of things change where the top priority may not be, can I win a national championship with that program, more as who's going to write me the biggest check. We have now seen Bryce Underwood, who was an LSU commit, who saw Brian Kelly's plan and thought, I really like this. I'm going to fit perfect into the scheme. Shoot, I could possibly even win a national championship with them. And we all heard Michigan coming in, well, we're going to write you this check. Have we ever heard that publicly before? Not really. This is new to all of us. We all saw what happened with the Reggie Bush drama, but this is now public knowledge. NIL is here, and it is here to stay, whether people like it or not. So was it surprising when we just got the news Bryce Underwood has flipped his commitment from LSU to go to Michigan, and we are now hearing for $12 million. I am not talking about professional football, folks. I am talking about college football. With me today are both of my hosts, David Street.
What's up, everybody?
And Ed Smith.
Hook 'em, y'all.
David, I want to get your reaction here. Being in the SEC, we know that the SEC is usually very heavy in recruiting and very heavily desired from a high school aspect. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I think first things first, what we need to understand is that LSU was not willing to get into a bidding war with Michigan. LSU has been behind other programs in their NIL efforts, and that's not surprising, partially because Brian Kelly, since coming to LSU, has made it very clear that he wants to build his team through high school recruiting while, filling whatever necessary roster spots he has left through the portal. So he has made it very clear that he has not want to rely so much on NIL and things like that. I think the way that I see it is that I think LSU was sending the message to Bryce Underwood that, hey, you might be very talented, but you're only a high schooler and you are not bigger than the program. Because, and Matt, I don't know if you mentioned it in your opening monologue or not, but the final offer that LSU had given Bryce Underwood was $1.5 million per year for 4 years, Well, Michigan is now offering him around $3 million, and I think LSU was telling Underwood, "Hey, listen, we recognize your talent. This is how much we're willing to offer you, but we are not going to go higher than that." And right now, you just see kind of LSU being dinosaur NIL era coming back to bite them in the ass.
Yeah, and that's perfect because I'm gonna bring this over to Ed. For the most part, I don't see anything that LSU did here as wrong because this is what we've been accustomed to, and I still feel like they came about this the correct way. Yes, like David said, dinosaur kind of era, but besides handing out more money, what would you have changed differently for LSU, Ed?
I really wouldn't have changed anything. The only thing that I would change is what the future of the quarterback position at LSU looks like, because Bryce Underwood has made it known that he wants to play year one. And with the way Nussmeier is playing at this point, he's going to continue to be there. Am I wrong? Is he a senior? Is he gone after
He's
this
going to
year?
He's going to be back next year. I
Okay,
don't
so
know what year
he's
he's at right now, but he'll be back next year.
so Nussmeier is going to continue to be the starter for LSU. That's another factor in this that's not being talked about is what Bryce Underwood wants is not only to get paid, because we all want to get paid. You want to get paid out there. I want to get paid. We all want to get paid. But what he had requested is the ability to play year one. And if you've looked at Michigan's quarterback situation this year at all, you would see that they need a quarterback to come in and start year one. Yes, it's going to be similar to like a uh, Bryce Young going into Carolina as the number one pick. He's getting paid. He's the number one pick, so he should play. Well, if you're going to pay this much to a freshman coming in, he has to play. There's no room and there's no time for him to sit out and learn anything, because that return on investment has to start on day one when you're shelling out this kind of cash.
So I just wanted to add a couple things. One, I do want to backtrack just a little on what I said before. When I said that LSU being behind in NIL efforts is not surprising because Brian Kelly has made it clear how he wants to build through recruiting. Well, as soon as I started saying that, I realized that that didn't really make any sense because NIL is pretty much how you recruit nowadays. So I do want to walk back on that part of what I said. But also, just we have to understand here that this isn't like losing on some really good 4-star or just really good 5-star prospect. Bryce Underwood is one of the best high school players that we have ever seen, ever, period. He is up there with the likes of Trevor Lawrence. And to lose out on him, even if LSU is able to maintain a top 5 or a top 8 class, to lose a guy of that caliber is just such a massive blow. And from my understanding, LSU did not even have a backup plan. Like they were all in on Bryce Underwood. And this is basically the equivalent of if Kevin Durant announced that he was going to play for the Warriors, but then changed his mind and decided to sign with the San Antonio Spurs instead. It's that same kind of monumental impact.
Yeah, and as far as Brian Kelly goes, it's not like he is like Dabo Sweeney saying, we aren't going to use the transfer portal at all. Brian Kelly's using tools, but it's just in this case he didn't use enough of the tools like Michigan did. And although Michigan won the national championship last year, they don't look like they did then, and it's kind of iffy on the direction on where you're going to go there. But LSU's kind of in the same boat. They still have to prove a lot. They play in the SEC, and they got to win those big matchups. But this is such a big blow to LSU because, one, not having that backup plan, but we know, two, how tough it is to recruit down in the South with all the other juggernaut schools that you have to deal with down there. So where does LSU go from here? They're going to have to go back to the drawing board because I think what they did was right, but they lost out on something big. The one thing that they didn't account for is having a backup plan. So Nussmeier, although he hasn't declared or anything like that, I have seen him in mock drafts, but I think he is expected to come back. But they need him to, because they don't have another plan. But they need to start planning for the year after that now. So that's what I think they have to do. Any other final thoughts on that, guys?
Two. I've got two here. One, that $3 million a year that, or even $1.5 million extra that Michigan is paying, uh, uh, paying Underwood, that $1.5 million could go for LSU toward getting the absolute best offensive line to protect Nussmeier, which will make him that much better of a quarterback than what he's shown so far. So that's one. Two, Connor Stallions is the coach for Bryce Underwood in high school. So for somebody that we all know after watching the Netflix show and everything, just a complete Michigan homer, and bringing that type of mentality, uh, that nudge. It's kind of like if your brother's really into something and you're really not sure about it, but he keeps nudging you, like, hey, why don't you come on, with me? Why don't you become what I've become out of this? That type of thing. So that can't be understated, that Bryce Underwood's had Michigan in his ear for the past year and a half while he's been committed to LSU, because of Connor Stallions being the coach at that high school.
Well, so I do have some final thoughts, and I'm going to sound like an old man here, which is ironic because I'm younger than both of you. But no high school player, okay, or no high schooler should ever get that much money. And yes, that includes people at at Florida as well. Okay. And something that I've been seeing people saying, and I want to address this to you guys because both of you guys are fathers. You know, something that dads are saying that kind of makes my skin crawl is when, and I guess in a way I don't blame them for saying it, but when they say, well, if my kid was offered that much money, I would tell them to take it. And I just don't understand because, one, you're a high schooler. Like, you don't have the maturity or the experience to handle that much money. Now, people who are in high school work jobs like McDonald's, or they might work at a shoe store, so they obviously have some money management skills. But again, as I say, generally speaking, they don't have the maturity and the experience to handle that much money. I mean, there's a reason why the richest people in the world have professionals, financial advisors to help them out. And then, not to mention Ed and Matthew, we often hear about adults who go bankrupt, adults who were loaded, but were stupid with their spending, and then they just went broke. So if we can't trust an adult to handle his or her money responsibly, how the hell are we supposed to trust a high schooler with that much money? I mean, like I said, you guys are both parents. Like, what do you guys think when you hear people talk about how, oh, if my kid was offered that much money, I would tell them to take it? No, I think you're crazy.
Well, for me, I get it in this sense. You had mentioned the McDonald's job, because everybody mentions the McDonald's job when it comes to high schoolers having their first crack at work and getting income. So, David, I will ask you this.
Okay.
What part of a McDonald's job can you do in which you could be unable to walk the day after that, at the time that it occurs?
So what job at McDonald's can I do that I would be unable to walk?
Right.
I'm not really sure I have a clear answer for you.
So what I'm getting at is, playing football is a dangerous sport, especially at the speed and the strength and the power that it is done at a D1 level for any kid. So if there is something that occurs on a football field, whether he's being paid 1.5 million or 3 million, he needs to have something in his back pocket to take care of his expenses and his ability to make money outside of football if anything on the football field occurs. So making sure that he is financially set enough to where he doesn't necessarily have to, I wouldn't say worry about it, but be not be struggling the rest of his life because of what happened on a football field.
Yeah, and I mean, for me, the way I look at it is when you raise your kid, uh, for me, for my instance, I have a son, is I want him to strive to be the best that he can at whatever he does, and I want him to get rewarded for it. Where Bryce Underwood is getting rewarded for his hard work and efforts, although he's young, the times have changed. So that's where it's tough, is that since the times have changed and they can pay someone like that amount of money in hopes that he brings them, a championship or something, they are going to reward him for that. And as a father, you want to feel grateful for that because you raised your kid up to strive to be the best version they can. And Bryce Underwood did exactly that. It's just tough because, yes, young people with money, but in the end, that's kind of how the times have changed. So I could see why the dad would say that, because the times have changed. But NIL's still new, and it's such a catch-22, and it's going to be like that for some time.
Fair enough.
Yeah. But on to the new rankings that came out. I'll do 1 through 13 here because it's really what matters. And yes, I say 13 because we have seen over the weeks that number seems to change. Coming in 1 and 2 was Texas the same? But 1, 2, and 3, Oregon, Ohio State, and Texas. 4, 5, and 6, we got Penn State, Indiana, Notre Dame. 7, 8, 9, we have Alabama, Miami, Ole Miss. 11, 12, 13, we've got Georgia, Tennessee, Boise State, and then SMU. This has been such a talking point since the rankings came out because Alabama jumped Miami by beating Mercer, the almighty Mercer. And now you have it shaken up because BYU lost. And BYU, I want to add, they went all the way to 14. But BYU would make this playoff because they are currently leading the Big 12. So right now, a hypothetical projection on this bracket, you've got BYU at 12 versus 5 seed Ohio State. You got the 9th seed Alabama and 8th seed Notre Dame. Georgia being the 11th seed against the 6th seed Penn State. And Ole Miss versus Indiana, 10th seed versus 7th seed. The teams that would get the bye, you got number 1 Oregon, number 2 Texas, number 3 Miami, and number 4 Boise State. They aren't number 4, obviously. If you heard my rankings, Boise State's number 12, but they would be the highest ranked conference winner at this time. So they get a first round bye. Their hard work is paid off, okay? I'm just going to say that it has paid off, and they get a first round bye. This new college playoff bracket is so crazy, guys. It's such a doozy here. Ed, what are your initial thoughts on this?
My initial thoughts is the worst possible scenario for the college football committee is taking place week by week by week by week. Mm-hmm. There is a possibility where we could see the SEC, which I think we can all agree is the best conference in college football. Big Ten is very top heavy, but there's a lot of laggards at the bottom of that conference. To have so many of the top SEC schools have 2 losses right now, that is not what they envisioned when they put this together. They did not envision the only SEC school right now to have just 1 loss be Texas. So that is just absolute worst case scenario, and it has painted the CFP in such a corner that they don't know what's what, and the people watching it, watching the television show of it, they don't know what's what. So, does the ranking for this week matter in the long run? Probably not. However, this is supposed to provide a blueprint to what to expect as things progress. I think there's still a possibility that they completely rework this entire ranking system when we get down to when seeds occur. That's where I think the proof will be in the pudding.
You
Go
can
ahead, David.
no, you can bounce back off of Ed's point real quick.
Well, and I think you're right, Ed, that they are going to be changing some things up because if you heard when I talked about the rankings, Tennessee came in at 11, and they aren't going to be in this. They would get jumped. We saw that with Georgia originally, too. They got jumped by Boise State. So just because you're in the top 12 doesn't mean you will make it to the playoffs. So that is a point that that needs to be honed on. But David?
Yeah, that's actually one of the things that I wanted to bring up. But first thing is that I would have Miami number 6 over Alabama and Notre Dame. So I would have them over Alabama because Miami has 1 loss to Alabama's 2 losses. So that takes care of that. And I would have them over Notre Dame because Miami's 1 loss was to an underrated Georgia Tech team, whereas Notre Dame's loss was to a 7th place MAC team. And as far as Tennessee goes, well, gentlemen, it's looking like the biggest debate or one of the biggest debates that is going to happen as we inch closer and closer to the final rankings is if both these teams, Alabama and Tennessee, enter with 2 losses, then who do you let in, Alabama or Tennessee? And I've heard arguments for both teams, and I want to hear what you guys think, and I'll just give my opinion first. I think I would let Alabama in. Yes, Tennessee does have the head-to-head, and that should not be ignored. That being said, the quality of your losses also has to matter, okay? And Alabama has better losses than Tennessee. And I never, ever thought I would say this ever in a year, but it turns out losing to Vanderbilt is better than losing to Arkansas. I never thought I would say that, but it's just the reality of where things are at right now. So again, I understand Tennessee has the win over Alabama, but Alabama has better quality losses. And guys, we all remember how epically butthurt FSU fans got when they missed the playoffs. I'm telling you, if Tennessee missed the playoffs, we're probably going to see an FSU style of just crazy ranting and just all sorts of craziness from Tennessee fans.
Well, we knew that even though they expanded to a 12-team playoff, it still would cause drama because that 13th team or whoever gets left out will still be butthurt. So it's going to be like that no matter even if you move it up to a 64-team playoff. There will still be teams that get upset that they don't get to make it. So they're never going to escape that part of it. But what I'm curious about is where do they draw the fine line? Are they strictly doing the top teams in the country, or are they have in the back of their mind teams that outside of the 12 will get to leapfrog and get their way in? Because we are seeing that, because although Miami was behind in the rankings, there still would be the 3 seed in the bracket and get a bye. So I'm curious as to how they look at it. And Ed, you brought up a point of, how much does this rankings matter right now versus the next couple weeks? And I'm actually going to say I think it does, because here's another nightmare scenario here, and I am going to jump ahead to one of the games we're going to preview here. But Ohio State is the number 2 team in the country. As of right now, they are outside the bubble of the first round bye because of Oregon. But let's say Ohio State lose to Indiana. They don't make it to the Big Ten championship. Because of where they're at right now as the number 2 team in the country, I bet you they would still make it because that's how high I think they look at them right now as the number 2 team in the country, that if they were to lose to an Indiana team who is the number 5th team in the country, well, surely they're going to keep them in it, right?
Well, if
That's just kind of how
Indiana
I feel
loses,
about it.
if Indiana loses this, do you keep them because they're not the brand that Ohio State is?
Hmm.
There's a
No, that they get the boot.
right that there's an argument to be made there.
Well, I
So
think, it would also depend on the manner in which Indiana loses, right? Because if they lose by just one possession, then I think you could argue that you still keep Indiana. But if they lose by at least a couple of touchdowns, then yeah, at that point, I would agree with you, Ed. They would get the boot.
Well, when you're not making that conference championship, that's one less week that gets to be viewed on you. And that's why it was always tough with Michigan and Ohio State, because when they would face each other, the other team usually wouldn't make the Big Ten championship. Now that they've scrapped the rankings or the divisions, that has now changed. But when you don't make those conference championship games, that does say a lot. Notre Dame, they're not in a conference, but they seem to always, make it.
you know which scenario baffles me that nobody's talked about? How is SMU, who's undefeated in conference, outside of the playoff, whereas Miami is inside of the playoff right now? That doesn't make any sense to me.
Well, doesn't and isn't the committee putting emphasis on style points on how you look when you win? And certainly Miami having a Heisman front runner or one of the front runners is helping them a lot, Ed.
Well, okay, so style points and eye test are two different things. So, and eye test is part of the reason why Texas is at number 3. I have no qualms about that, even though they don't really have a win over somebody that is currently scheduled in the top 25. So I can accept that part, but the eye test is different than style points. Style points to me is, say Ohio State uh, gets up 2 touchdowns, they're going to keep going for 3 touchdowns, 4 touchdowns to try and make that extra point to get up into the number 1 seed over an Oregon team, because these rankings are supposed to be how these teams look now, not how they looked 6 weeks ago, and just follow the path based upon uh, nothing changing as far as their record up to that point. If your ability to play has increased, if Ohio State looks better than what Oregon does after this weekend, I think it's possible that they jump to the number 1 seed, because not because of style points over a highly ranked Indiana team, and not necessarily how they've been playing, because we've all seen flaws with how Ohio State's been playing. But the style points of beating that highly ranked team, that's a different story.
Well, and that's also my point of why I think this ranking does matter, because the initial rankings, Miami was in the top 4. SMU was not, and although SMU is undefeated in conference play and undefeated in total, they are still sitting outside of it. Why? Because I think that initial ranking had some say in it, and so that's why I feel like these rankings do mean something. But it's all going to be scrambled here in a couple weeks, so that's where things will change. But I do think that it does set precedent on who they think are the top teams, and why I think some of them will remain even with a loss. And Ohio State would have 2 if they lose to the Indiana Hoosiers, who we're going to talk about right now. And this is a big time matchup. This is top 10, top 5 actually matchup. Number 2, number 5 right now. Indiana going on the road to Ohio State. Columbus, the shoe, is not an easy place to play in. One of the biggest storylines in this game is the starting center for Ohio State Buckeyes did tear his Achilles and is going to be out the rest of the year. That's a big blow. A center is so important to a team. from snapping the ball, there is a difference between centers. All right, I'm going to say that when it comes to snapping. So Will Howard's going to have to adjust to the new center, and the guy's been your staple on the offensive line. So there's going to be a lot of change there. So that is a big storyline to me. But the other storyline is, can Indiana Hoosiers rise to the occasion? Because this is not a brand. Indiana is not known for their football, and they've done so well that Coach Signetti got a great contract extension. But now this is where you need to prove that that extension meant something here, and that is to face off against Ohio State, which is the prime Big Ten football team, okay? David, Indiana, they've done some impressive things on offense, but they haven't beat top flight opponents. How do you see them facing off against this Ohio State team?
Well, as much as injuries suck, obviously, bless you. As much as injuries suck, I think this is an advantage that Indiana should and will take advantage of, because Indiana is second in the Big Ten in sacks, and Mikael Kamara is having a great year as he has 9.5 sacks on the season. So with Ohio State starting center going down, that potentially opens up a pathway for Kamara to have a big day against the Buckeyes. You are right that Indiana really has not played the most impressive schedule. I mean, at the end of the day, you have to play the teams that are in front of you. But let's also keep in mind that this is the same Indiana team that won just 3 games the season before. So I don't care how easy your schedule is. To go from 3 wins to 10 wins the next season is hella impressive and deserves kudos. I don't think Indiana is going to win this game because obviously they are less talented than Ohio State. I mean, that kind of goes without saying there. So I don't think Indiana is going to win. That being said, however, I think Indiana has a lot to prove, and I think they know that people are doubting them. There are people who are saying, there's no way that you guys are going to go into the horseshoe and beat the Buckeyes. Okay, it's just not going to happen. I don't think Indiana is going to win, but I do think Indiana is going to put up a hell of a fight, especially when you consider that Nebraska, who we all thought was turning the corner, and now they're just back to being Nebraska. Nebraska put up a hell of a fight against Ohio State. And so I think it's reasonable to expect the same kind of effort from Indiana. And if Indiana does beat Ohio State, I think they will, and they should jump up to number 2, okay? Not number 1, because, Matthew, your Ducks also beat Ohio State, and Oregon has played a tougher schedule. But I do think Indiana should at least jump to number 2 if they do beat Ohio State. But again, I don't think they will.
And Ed, my question for you is, the whole year up until last week, we saw an Indiana offense score at least 40 points each game, and when they faced against Michigan, they were only able to put up 20. How do you see that offense faring against this Ohio State team? Do you think that Michigan kind of stumped them, or are they going to continue that offensive dominance?
There are aspects of the Michigan football team that I don't think have fallen off near as much as what we like to say they have.
Mm-hmm.
And the defensive line is one of them. So that's something that you could see Indiana not scoring as many points against them as you would say, I don't know, Northwestern or Purdue or any of these other teams that are in the Big Ten. So one thing that I will point out is there are I think it's 3 common opponents in the Big Ten that these 2 teams have played, and Indiana has scored more 75 plus more points against those same 3 teams than Ohio State did. So it isn't a lack of explosiveness. It isn't a lack of defensive prowess, as David pointed out. But what I think the difference is the moxie of the athletes that you're putting on the field. Ohio State, they are the gold standard for the Big Ten at this point, and have been for quite some time. So they get all the recruits, including the $20 million roster that they put together. Indiana, I don't think they have $20 million to rub between anybody in that whole university. So, go ahead.
No, finish your point, Ed.
My point being, Ohio State has, being that gold standard, they've played in bigger games, and they know what this game looks like. Indiana is walking into a game that they have no idea what to expect, just what they want to have happen, not what actually does happen in a game like this.
It feels kind of weird to say, but in a way, doesn't Ohio State seem like they're kind of, flying under the radar? And that's weird to say. They're a top 3, top 5 brand. And, the last few years, they've been overshadowed by Michigan, right? Well, Michigan isn't good this season, but now we have Indiana, who's kind of stealing the Big Ten spotlight away from Ohio State. So it just kind of feels like the Buckeyes have kind of been flying under the radar this year, and arguably the past couple of years as well. What do you guys think?
Well, I think it's since C.J. Stroud went to the NFL. I think with Kyle McCord last year and now Will Howard, they aren't this flashy Ohio State team. But I will say, since the Oregon loss, Ohio State has gotten better each week. They really have. And yeah, I agree, David, that although they're the number 2 team in the country, it has seemed like they have been flying under the radar. But the one question that remains here is just how big does a victory for Ryan Day mean in this game? Because he doesn't have the best track record in winning some of these big games. And we always ask every year when they face Michigan, how big is this game? We know how big it is. But I think this game is going to be even bigger because of the ranked matchup that this is. I mean, they better beat Michigan this year because they're a lot better than them. But if he loses this game and somehow loses to Michigan, it's almost like you could say bye-bye Ryan Day in Columbus.
I understand why you say that. And this is going to sound – I'm going to sound like Captain Obvious here. But at the end of the day, Michigan is always going to be, the bigger test. And why do I say that? And here's why. If Ryan Day beats Indiana but loses to Michigan, no one's going to give a shit about beating Indiana, okay? But if Ryan Day loses to Indiana but he beats Michigan, his Indiana loss is going to get forgiven.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, Ed?
Oh, it'll get forgiven by the Ohio State faithful, but it won't be forgiven by the CFP.
Yeah.
Fair.
So there is that. With Ryan Day, he's baffling because he has such a good track record, but it's that he's a very good coach, but is he a good coach for an elite program? That becomes the question. But there's so few head coaches that fit the mold of being an elite coach for an elite program. There's so few of them that you can't necessarily just go out and pluck one off the street somewhere or from somebody else's staff or somebody else's program. You are already at the pinnacle for coaches in the country. How do you get better than that? So as long as Ryan Day beats Michigan, he keeps his job. Yeah. If he loses to Indiana and beats Michigan, he would probably still need to get through at least the first 2 rounds of the playoff for him to keep his job. But in any case, Ryan Day should not be replaced, but he probably would be.
Well, I'll just add, one more point here. How was Jim Harbaugh finally able to get to the top at Michigan? You
Counter
know,
Stallions.
okay, yes, Connor Stallions, but he also took advantage of Urban Meyer retiring from Ohio State. Well, Ryan Day has an opportunity to do that now. Taking advantage of Jim Harbaugh, obviously not retiring, but leaving Michigan to go to the NFL. So Jim Harbaugh was able to finally uh, win it all when everybody else was going down. Ryan Day finds himself in the exact situation. So the question is, will he be able to take advantage of, like I said, everybody else going down? Only time will tell.
Well, he better, because if he loses to this Michigan team after Harbaugh left, your home's going to already be up for sale in Columbus because you're not welcome back.
Is it going to be on sale or is it going to be on fire?
A little bit of both. It's going to be an auction at this point. But a couple weeks ago, we talked about spoilers and South Carolina being that team that was playing spoiler. They are now ranked in the top 25. This next week, we could have, or this next matchup, we could have a potential spoiler as the Texas A&M Aggies go in and they face off against the Auburn Tigers. I can tell you right now, the College Football Committee would love for the Auburn to win this game because that kind of helps them out with the whole Texas A&M thing. But there's still going to be a lot of drama when it comes to the SEC regardless. But this does smell like a spoiler type of matchup to me, only for the fact that it's in Auburn, it's at Jordan-Hare, and it's the Texas A&M Aggies. All right, I just have to be real about that. That is, they're playing in this game. There could be a potential spoiler upset here, and the fact that they only have it at 2.5 points. This is a 4-win Auburn team versus an 8-win Texas A&M team, and you're at 2.5 points. That should tell you right now that even the bettors think that Auburn's got a chance in this game. But Ed, we talked about South Carolina. Does this kind of smell similar to an upset to you?
It does smell similar to an upset, and there's a couple of points I'll make. Mm-hmm. One, the running joke for Texas A&M is the fact that their name is Texas 8-4. And if Auburn loses this week, if Texas A&M loses this week and next week against Texas, what's their record? 8-4. So it holds true all the way across the board. Now, the other point I would make is there are only 2 teams that are currently above 500 that Texas A&M has played. And who are those 2 teams? South Carolina and Notre Dame. Yeah. Who are Texas A&M's 2 losses?
Those
South
teams.
Carolina and Notre Dame. So I don't want to hear this rhetoric about, well, Texas A&M has played a much harder schedule than anybody could fathom, when the only 2 teams that they've played that were above 500, they've lost to. So that doesn't make any sense to me. And you've got an Auburn team that is getting geared up for Alabama over in the Iron Bowl the following week. They realize that if they are going to make a bowl this year or make themselves eligible for one, they have to win this game. They have to win this game. They have to win the Iron Bowl. And that should be motivation enough for this Auburn team and Peyton Thorne, God love him, to step up and run this offense and not make that crucial mistake against a Texas A&M team that is being built to be a bully type team. But does Auburn make that mistake and let Texas A&M bully them? That is the question that we're going to see in this game. I think it'll be closer than a lot of people realize. Yes, it's only a 2.5 point spread last time we saw. It could be even tighter than that when you're talking between these 2 teams. I think Texas A&M comes out of this, but I think they get the pants scared off of them.
So I don't agree with comparing Texas A&M to South Carolina as far as spoilers go, because South Carolina has proven in more recent history that they are, that they play spoiler more than A&M does, because South Carolina a couple years ago beat the brakes off of Tennessee when Tennessee was just about to enter the playoffs. And then meanwhile, in the Hugh Freeze era, what has Auburn done to prove that they are a spoiler? The closest that they came to being a spoiler was almost beating Alabama last year until the very last second. Okay, and then also I completely disagree with the spread here being 2.5. To Vegas. Have you seen who Auburn's quarterback is? Okay, it's Peyton Thorne. Did you forget that Peyton Thorne is Auburn's quarterback? How the hell do you have this game at just 2.5? I don't get it at all. Okay, and listen, we can make all the jokes about Texas A&M that we want, but at the end of the day, they are 8-2. Okay, and Auburn is spiraling out of control, and I just don't see a path to victory for Auburn at all. I think Texas A&M is going to beat them up pretty good.
Yeah, and I know the recruits love Hugh Freeze and what can happen at Auburn, but I think Mike Elko's got his current troops in order. I could see them winning this game, but it's just one of those games that you never know. It's the SEC, and it's the last 2 weeks of the season. So, but I still go with Texas A&M here. But if there's an upset that happens, I won't be surprised. Speaking of upsets, we saw an upset last week, and we actually predicted this happening, and that was BYU losing to Kansas. They are now on the road, facing Arizona State Sun Devils, who are now also ranked as they are sitting at 21. This Big 12 is becoming very interesting on who's going to take this conference because, believe it or not, Colorado's knocking on the door. Arizona State now is knocking on the door. It's BYU's lead to lose. And this is going to be a real test for them because Kenny Dillingham, I like him as a head coach, and what he's doing down in Arizona State is phenomenal. I think that they're going to bring a really, really good game against BYU, and Arizona State's actually looked more impressive as of late than BYU. BYU has escaped, but they have gotten wins. Wins are wins. But last week against Kansas, that was not quite what happened, as they did pick up their first loss on the year. David, can this matchup potentially be who takes the Big 12?
I was thinking about that earlier today, actually, and shout out to both of us, Matthew, for picking Kansas for the upset, because I think you and I both reasoned that Kansas was a lot better than their record had indicated. And just how crazy is it that the two teams that everybody thought was going to be among the worst in the Big 12, all right, they are now in the top 3, top 4 of the Big 12 standings. I mean, nobody thought that Arizona State and BYU would be where they're at today. And, on one hand, BYU wants to bounce back from its only loss of the season so far. On the other hand, Arizona State wants to keep proving that it's legit. Because at this point, guys, Arizona State has more to prove, in my opinion, than BYU does. Because I think now at this point, BYU has gotten enough respect, especially since for a certain amount of time, they looked like the favorites to win the Big 12. And so even with their loss to Kansas, BYU has earned enough respect from people where people are like, okay, BYU, we see you. It's not like that with Arizona State. Arizona State is still underrated. Arizona State still has a lot to prove. What do you think, Ed?
I think BYU still has a lot to prove to say that they're not a fluke. Yes, they went on this great run, but have you seen the rest of the Big 12? It's not been, it hasn't been a real banger of a league this year. If you look at their other in-conference foes, whom they've played so far this year, they have a combined record of 16-33. So in conference, it's not great with who they played. And you know who the biggest winner of this game is going to be? It's going to be Colorado, because if BYU gets knocked off, they wind up in the CFP rankings this next week. If Arizona State wins, that's one less team that they got to worry about over these last couple of weeks. So yes, this is a matchup for a respect nationally, to say, hey, we actually played decent football in the Big 12, but it's not a matchup that I think will mean as much to each of these programs as it means to the other programs that are trying to get into the Big 12 title game.
Yeah, I mean, because Arizona State, it'd be a different story if it wasn't for that loss to Cincinnati. They had no business losing to that Cincinnati team, but that's the past. The shoulda, coulda, wouldas. But it would be a more interesting matchup if they didn't lose against Cincinnati. But Colorado's licking their chops, hoping that BYU loses this game, and BYU could very well lose this game. Arizona State is a good team, besides that loss to Cincinnati. It's going to be a good game. I think it's going to be a very, very close game regardless. And I think if you want to give a closer game advantage, it's going to be BYU because they have won the majority of the close games. But Arizona State, it's a home game, so I think they're going to have a little bit more of a atmosphere, excitement to this game. So,
and also just like, how awesome is it that Arizona State has been able to bounce back from their Herm Edwards debacle?
Yeah, they have. I mean, like I said, Kenny Dillingham, I think was a perfect guy for the job. So we'll see if he continues to prove that.
He was the OC at Oregon before, right, Matthew?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So there's no bias there, I promise. But it ended up working out good for him, and he could very well lead this team to a Big 12 championship game. So good for him there. But that's it on college football. But, it's getting a little bit colder out here, and these streets are getting a little bit more icy. All right, David? And the word on these icy streets, NHL. It's getting a little interesting. It's getting a little hot. Not figuratively, because it's still got to stay icy here. But we got to talk about the first and foremost drama that's happening in NHL right now, and that's the Bruins firing Jim Montgomery. David, did this come as a surprise to you?
Not exactly, Matthew, because while the Bruins have not been the worst team this year by record per se, they have been a lot worse than their record indicates. I mean, they have been getting blown out left and right in their losses, and you could argue that it was time to make a change. But also, while Jim Montgomery certainly shared his blame for how the season had gone, I think most of the blame has to go up top, okay? Because this Bruins roster is not good enough to win a Stanley Cup anymore, okay? Brad Marchand is getting old. Jeremy Swayman, who I'll also mention him in a few minutes, but Jeremy Swayman, his play has regressed the last few seasons. And I think you could argue that the Bruins winning 65 games in Jim Montgomery's first season was actually a curse. And the reason why I say it was a curse is because when you start off on such a high like that, bless you, Ed, when you start off on such a high like that, it sets up unrealistic expectations the rest of the way. Because, you don't, not that you should expect a team to win 60 games again, but you win 60 plus games. The expectation is that, well, we should be winning Stanley Cups. We should be making it to the Stanley Cup Finals. Well, no, as I said, the Bruins don't have a good enough roster. And this is going to sound crazy, Matthew, but I firmly believe that Boston lucked into that 65 win season. And why do I say that? Because multiple players that season had career years, including their goaltenders, Linus Ullmark, and Jeremy Swayman. Well, Linus Olmark isn't with the team anymore. And as I said before, Matthew, Jeremy Swayman has seen his play regress. So again, this was not surprising. This is a change that probably needed to happen, but I think bigger changes need to be made up top the Bruins organization.
Yeah, and we've seen time and time again the NHL. It's very cutthroat. It's got that win now type of mentality, and if you haven't really done much before, you're quick to get cut off, and that's what we saw with Montgomery. Is yeah, he had a record year, but he didn't win a Stanley Cup final, and that brings me to Pittsburgh Penguins with Coach Sullivan right now. He does have 2 Stanley Cup final trophies, but they're looking worse. The Penguins are looking like one of the worst teams in the NHL right now, but he has yet to get fired. Is he going to? I almost guarantee he will before the season's over. But the only thing that's keeping him on is that he has won 2 Stanley Cup finals, whereas Montgomery did not with the Bruins. So that record didn't mean much to them because he didn't take them to the promised land that year.
And it makes me think of how crazy it is because we know that that there's a very short there's a shelf life for NHL head coaches, right? Like it seems like they get fired an average of 2 to 3 years. Whereas you have Tampa Bay Lightning head coach John Cooper, who is pretty much the outlier. And not to sound biased here, but I don't see how you could argue against John Cooper being the best coach, or at least being a top 3, top 5 coach, in the NHL. And it's not just because of the cup wins that he has, but year after year after year, he is just always having us in the playoffs. And the only time where we did not make the playoffs was the first season he took over, when our previous coach, Guy Boucher, got fired. And so Cooper kind of took over midseason and didn't really have time to implement the system. And then the second time we missed the playoffs was when our injuries were just too much to overcome. But other than that, we have not missed the playoffs. And, we're not as talented as we have been before, but we're still having a solid year. I don't expect us to win the cup. I don't expect us to make the conference finals. But the fact that we have still been competitive under John Cooper is just absolutely astounding to think about.
Yeah, he's brought consistency along with trophies. So that's why he still remains there and remains to be one of the top coaches in the NHL. Lastly, one of the top storylines going into this year is, can Alex Ovechkin tie or break Wayne Gretzky's all-time goal scoring record? And he has been on a tear so far this year up until he got hurt, which he just got hurt this last week. He is 26 goals shy of tying the record. And at the rate that he was going to get it. He is on a week-to-week basis right now with his injury, but I know him. Ovi's one of the top. He's one of the toughest guys in the NHL. If he could be back, he'll be back soon. But that is a record to keep an eye out on. I mean, we know that Wayne Gretzky holds some of the top records in the NHL and is regarded as the best player of all time in NHL. But to be able to have the all-time goal scoring mark ahead of him is something to be happy about. And Ovechkin, he knows how to find the net.
Well, let me just say that even if Alex Ovechkin is not able to break Wayne Gretzky's goal record, I still consider Alex Ovechkin to be the best goal scorer that we've ever seen. All right, because you have to consider the fact that that Gretzky was scoring goals against teams that did not know how to play defense. All right, and meanwhile, Alex Ovechkin is playing in a very defensive-minded era in the NHL. Again, that's not to undermine the legendary career that Gretzky had, but even if Ovechkin doesn't break that record, I think he's the best goal scorer that we've ever seen.
He's a pure sharpshooter. I mean, the guy, like I said, he knows how to find the net, and when it comes to scoring, his name in that is synonymous. So those are something to keep an eye out on. Is yes, the firings of Jim Montgomery, how the Bruins and where they go from here, and essentially who's going to be the next coach to be fired. It could be Coach Sullivan with my Pittsburgh Penguins, and Ovechkin comes back from injury. Expect him to continue to do what he does best and find the net. But that is about all we have today, folks. We appreciate you guys tuning in. We look forward to hearing from you guys in the comments section, so please make sure you do that and drop a like and subscribe button and share these videos. Once again, appreciate you guys being here. We look forward to seeing you on our next episode as we recap these college football matchups. But until next time, guys, we are rounding third and we are headed for home.